77 WABC. And now, the longest-running program in the history of 77 WABC. Religion on the Line with Rabbi Joseph Potasnik and Deacon Kevin McCormick.
The shaky drove his Cadillac. He went cruising down the bill. The prison was standing on the radiator grill.
Welcome back, Religion Online. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
I'm Deacon Kevin McCormick.
You know, whenever there is a tragedy involving Islamic extremists, I get calls from people who say, we got to hear from Zuhdi Jasser. He's our hope out there. And with that, we're honored to go to Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser, president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, host of the brand new podcast, Reform This, on Blaze Radio Network, and author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. That's an impressive introduction.
And we'd like to thank you for being on.
Good morning, Dr. Jasser.
Good morning. Good morning. And it's always sad to be back with you after another tragedy, especially in this month of Ramadan, when it's the time of atonement. But thank you.
I was talking with a friend last night, and he said when Dr. Jasser comes on, just ask him the following. What can we do to strengthen him? We need people who are going to stand up with courage and conviction. He's one of them. But he can't be standing, up there alone. There have to be masses with him to say, we are ready to take you on. You do not define our religion. It's just, unfortunately, it hasn't happened thus far. So maybe we need to do more.
Yeah, I think, we learned a lot this week. And this weird conversation America was having where the president was trying to say, and Secretary Clinton also, that somehow terminology doesn't matter. It's just talking points, and what's going to change? Will we win the war if he calls it radical Islam? Well, I have to tell you, that's what makes us relevant. If America is having a conversation about a battle going on within the House of Islam, and our leaders stop lying to us and start calling these guys what they are, we'll start putting the dots together, and it makes it relevant that voices of Islam be accounted. If you don't call it what it is, it does matter, because the policy continues to be countering violent extremism, continues to focus on distractions like guns and other things, which might be problems, but certainly don't solve this problem that I can help you with. And it also then disconnects the reality that, and this is the tough part, is that, well, maybe the numbers being killed are only 40 or 50 or whatever, but globally, you have hundreds of thousands being affected from Syria to Iran, and this is all one diagnosis. So if you want the voices of Islam to be heard, the media will pay attention to us when people start calling it radical Islam.
So I was saying last week that I remember following the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, and the person who was responsible claimed to be religious and doing it for religious reasons. And we were horrified in the Jewish world. We said, we got to look at what inspired him. What were the texts that were used that he thought justified that heinous act? And I think that needs to be done as well. The Muslim community needs to stand up and say, what is it in the Quran that's being perverted to promote this kind of hate agenda? What passages are being used by these people to justify this activity?
And the majority of our leadership are in such denial and such enablers of the problem. Look at the Middle East on media just in the last week. It is horrific, the amount of homophobia that came after this attack. Even after the attack, while the Saudi government claimed to be condemning this, they didn't condemn the droves of congratulations that came from websites that are just rife with anti-homosexual sentiment, and just like we saw with the acts after Charlie Hebdo, with the anti-Semitic comments that come. I mean, these ideologies, we have to start owning up to the fact that violent homophobia, the precursor of it, is nonviolent homophobia. Violent anti-Semitism, the precursor is nonviolent anti-Semitism. And the root cause of all of this is theocratic Islam. And these governments that claim to be our allies, the whole reason the president will not call it what it is is because he says, well, we're not at war against Islam. I think what he's trying to say is we're not at war against Saudi Arabia, Iran, and by gosh, I think Americans realize we really are. These are not our allies. They are producing these radicals, and the only difference between Mateen and Saudi Arabia is Saudi Arabia basically quietly kills homosexuals, and they don't do it and call 911 when they're doing it.
You know, I was watching the sit-in at the House. I said, okay, good, I'm glad people stand up for what they believe in. But I said, a lot of those people who are now pushing for gun control, and I understand, stricter measures need to be taken in various instances, they weren't so strong when it came to the Iran deal. They had no problem with a deal that, eventually would allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and, my sentiment this week was, where's the sit-in in Ramadan right now? Why aren't Muslims sitting in front of mosques? The mosque the president went to, the Islamic Society of Baltimore in February, had a screed that was anti-homosexual a year earlier, where the imam of that society in Baltimore was calling for the eradication of homosexuality around the planet because of the scourge on humanity that it is. And our Muslim reform movement was protesting them not only because of that anti-homosexuality, but their gender apartheid, where they separate men and women. And we said these ideas are not only not commensurate with Americanism, but are precursors for radicalism, and yet the president, through a bigotry of low expectations, did not hold our community accountable. And when your listeners ask what can they do, hold our community accountable with some tough love, and then our voices will become necessary and will become part of the conversation. If we don't hold Muslims accountable, our voices of reform aren't necessary because people think there's no problem.
We're speaking with Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser. He's the president and the founder of American Islamic Forum on Democracy and the co-founder of Muslim Reform Movement, and also a regular here on Religion on the Line. Dr. Jasser, it's always great to talk to you, and it's also horrible to talk to you because it's usually connected to some terrible event. But I just want to kind of go deeper in what you just said, that we, the larger society, needs to show a tougher love on the Muslim community. I'll do it slowly. Are you asking for us to reform you, or doesn't the reform come within it? No matter who the president is, if we look at Obama or we look at the possibility of a Trump presidency, here you have two radically different extremes. But doesn't the fault lie within and not without?
Absolutely, but just like any battle that happens, we need to take sides. So whether you're Muslim or not, you can't sit this out. And if you sit it out, you basically are taking the side of the strong horse, the petro-Islamist dollars that are feeding the theocrats that dominate our community. So basically, by not taking sides within the House of Islam and saying, the secularists, those who want freedom and who reject the caliphate, who reject the Islamic State, our Muslim Reform Movement declaration is 2 pages. Your listeners should take that 2 pages and ask Muslims that they know, do they agree with it? If they agree with it, take the sides of Muslims that agree with that and give them platforms and ask them to sign up for our movement and ask them if they don't, why won't they? Because then they're really not taking the side of America. And it's not that hard. America was founded on fighting theocracy, so they don't have to be experts in Sharia. They just need to talk to Muslims and engage with those that reject theocracy.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm not looking to be adversarial, but with Christian reform, the reform came from within. It didn't come because when Catholicism, Vatican II, 50, 60 years ago, we didn't need the world to tell us to reform. We did it ourselves, and we constantly do that. I'm not quite sure, and I realize you don't have the hierarchy that Christianity, or particularly Catholicism, has, but I'm not quite sure what I can do to make that happen.
Well, if I could add this, though, I think one of the distinctions here is that the minute there's any kind of examination of within, you have the without saying Islamophobia, you have the without saying, you're being too critical, you're not being fair, you're treating them, with a different standard. I mean, for Muslims to fight, they need support from without. What we do is we do something that contravenes their opportunity to fight, because right away you put people on the defensive. You're an Islamophobe. The minute you start am I right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at the civil rights movements in the South, in Alabama, and the marches. If the non-black community ignored what the blacks were doing, would that civil rights movement have ever happened? I mean, yes, they needed to march for their own rights. There's no doubt that their leadership brought about an awakening of the general community, what our country was doing to the black community. But until the rest of America woke up, it never was happening. Same thing with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Do you think the only people pushing that hashtag are African Americans doing that? No, it's everybody. So I think it's time for Americans to start weighing in and saying, because I can give you guys, both of you, I can give you tons of names of reformers that are either in prison, prisoners of conscience, or being ignored. It's not that we don't exist. The problem is that nobody's paying attention to us. So all we need is folks to start shedding the light, the antiseptic of sunlight upon us and upon the regimes that we call our allies, and I think you'll start to see massive change.
Are there the numbers within the Muslim community that want to reform? Or like, whose side are they on? Like, when things like this happen, you're always there, doctor. You're always there. You're always making sure you call people to a truer understanding of Islam. You do it. There's no question about that. But with the average Muslim, average religious Muslim, who I won't pretend I know what they think, is there like this? Are they waiting for a savior to rise from the east? I mean, are they waiting for somebody, or is this just something that I don't understand the community, that they would need me to tell them that there's a problem in their house and that'll be enough and then they'll rise. And forgive me for being ignorant.
No, not at all. You asked that. That's the big question is, how deep does the reform movement go? And I can tell you, as in all movements, that we have to challenge and hold Muslims accountable. I know we have the leadership right now. There are more than me. 15 of us that signed this from Europe, Canada, and the U.S. We've got thousands of supporters. That's a small percentage of Muslims in general. But the bottom line is that I think once we start shedding, we have thousands that have said they want to support us, but really don't have the venue to do that. But that's still a minority. And I think just as the silent Germans and many silent majorities in the past that have been sort of given a pass, Muslims need to no longer be given a pass and need to start weighing in. Are they part of the solution or are they part of the problem? And I think eventually we saw in Egypt where the heat was high enough where when the Muslim Brotherhood took over that government, the majority, 10 million, went to the streets. And I think eventually, once American Muslims, as much as I feel a lot of Mr. Trump's verbiage is toxic, I think the good part of some of his verbiage is it gets Muslims to say, listen, this is our country too, and many of them will begin to say, hey, if we don't start taking action, we're going to be considered to be part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
Doctor, could you discuss the refugee issue? I know people on both sides of the issue. And one of the concerns here, too, is if you're concerned about the refugee, the influx of refugees, right away you're labeled a xenophobe. I see in Germany, it was 1 million refugees, and there's some real problems there. Is it so wrong to question whether or not we're equipped to handle refugees?
Not at all. Not at all. And this is, we need to pause all immigration. The problem when you say just Muslim immigration, A, that's not really a solution, and B, it really is blind to the fact that we don't have any way to vet against political threats, which are Islamist and jihadist, and the ideology that threatens us. People can lie about their faith in 2 seconds, but lying about a political ideology is harder if we're actually vetting for it. And not to mention 90-some% of the threats, be it in Paris and Belgium, yes, some of them may have been traveling to and from Syria, but they were all homegrown folks, actually. So the refugees may not be a threat, but I think what we can learn from Brexit and the exit of the UK is that nationalism at its core is the solution. I as a Muslim, the reason I didn't get radicalized was my American nationalism was the only thing I would ever die for. If ISIS taps into a global nationalism or Islamo-nationalism where Muslims want to die for the jihad cause. So the only way for Europe and America to protect itself from this viral ideologies is to recoup what it means to be British, what it means to be American. And I think that's what we can learn against the refugee influx is, yes, maintain our humanitarian standards, don't surrender to ISIS and say we won't take any Muslims in, but pause it until we can vet against the Islamist ideology.
Could you talk for a moment about CARE? Because they've been making some statements recently, and people say, well, CARE was not so bad, and yet look at the history of CARE. a lot of hatred has come out of that organization.
Well, I prefer to call them the Council for American Islamist Radicalization because, their entire mantra is to deceive the West into thinking that they are the problem, that foreign policy is the problem. They soak up the bandwidth with the grievance narrative so that we're not paying attention to reform. They just put out a list 3 days ago, 10 days after Orlando, not of what can we do to reform, but list of what I call a hit list of what they label as Islamophobes. And there are Muslim reformers on there. I'm on there as so-called the biggest threat to Islam in America is me, not the imams that preach homophobia, anti-Semitism. No, reformers that love our faith, that are trying to repair it, are actually the threats according to CARE. It shows you that really, at the end of the day, CARE is part of a foreign operation, a lobby for Saudi Arabia, for Qatar, for foreign interests, and I think they should be labeled as the Foreign Agent Registration Act. All
right. People want to learn more about your organization. Where do they go?
The American Islamic Forum for Democracy, AIFdemocracy.org. Our website for the Muslim Reform Movement is muslimreformmovement.org, and I hope people can listen to my podcast, Reform This. It's at iTunes and SoundCloud.
Well, I hope more people not only listen to you, but support you and stand with you. I was talking with a Muslim student at NYU, and she says, I'm so ashamed. I said, that's a good beginning to be ashamed. Now what are you going to do about it? And I think when people are more familiar with your work, they understand there is a role, there's a responsibility if they want change. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to sit here and talk tragedy after tragedy, and nothing will change. You're an agent for change, and we are most appreciative of all your efforts, and we stand with you. Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser, President and Founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. God bless. Appreciate it.